Good evening, everyone. My name is Christopher, and I'm an alcoholic and also an addict. Um, Thank you guys so much for all showing up tonight. You know, it really, it's a pleasure and it's very humbling to be asked to share at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. And I only hope that even one thing I say helps one person in the room. You know, and that's all we can really hope for here. You know, that we could plant even a small mustard seed of faith or hope in someone's life, because in my humble experience, you know, a mustard seed can move a mountain. But, you know, at the same time, you know, we have to remember to bring our shovel as well, you know. I'm not going to get really, really deep into my story or my drinking or my using or anything like that, because to be honest, I mean, I'm pretty sure that just about everybody in this room knows how to drink or how to use or anything like that. And frankly, you know, however you got here, you know, it matters that you're here. But I mean, in my experience, I'd rather speak on the solution and how my life's changed and how I've seen the lives of others around me change. But I will say this, from the time that I was very, very, very young, I always felt a little bit different, you know, not quite a part of, and that was something that I heard a lot when I first got into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And a lot of what I say is going to relate to AA because I usually go to a lot more AA meetings, but I mean, I'm definitely an addict as well, and there is a lot of that in my story. And I've personally met, I think the whole time I've been coming around the rooms, 1 to 2 people that didn't have any sort of drugs in their story. So I'm really, really happy that that stigmata has dropped away a little bit, because frankly, I think that it opens the door to a lot more new people. You know, it opens the door for a lot more people to get here and to feel comfortable here. Because I can speak for myself in saying that I didn't really feel comfortable basically ever, not for a long time, until I found ways to fit in how we all fit in, you know, which is by drinking, by using, by hanging out with crowds that in reality I never really felt comfortable around, but I lied to myself a lot about how I did anyway. You know, I'm going to stand up because I'm not used to doing this sitting down. This is just different. If you guys want, I mean, what do you guys think? Okay. All right. All right.
Don't scratch it.
Okay. I won't spill coffee on it either. Whatever. Either way. Thank you guys.
Not in public. You don't want to scratch it? Drain's right there.
Thanks, guys. So yeah, I showed up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was brought to my first meeting when I was 16 years old. I was drug in by a friend who, even at that age, took me aside and said, you know, man, you really might have a problem. Like, I don't know anyone that drinks or uses like you do. And I was barely 16 years old at the time. So, I mean, you know, even at that age, I definitely needed to hear this, but I wasn't ready to hear this. And I needed this, but I didn't want this. And, you know, the fact is that this thing is a program not for people that need it, but for people that want it, unfortunately. Because if this was a program for everybody that needed this program, then these rooms would be pretty packed. It would be pretty hard to find a seat in here. And I think that's something that everybody in this room can agree with. But like I said, man, I got introduced to it the first time when I was 16. I came back when I was 23. And then I put a little bit of time together for the first time. And that was when I was first introduced to the steps. That was when I got my first sponsor. But once again, I was very young, you know, and, you know, when I look over and see the young people here, like, it really means a lot to me. And all I can say is I wish for you guys the gift of desperation, man. I really, really do, you know, because the gift of desperation is what I needed to truly get serious about this thing. And at the time, I thought that I was ready, and, you know, I did a little bit of work. But the fact is that I was really ready to stop drinking and to stop using, but I wasn't ready to live in any kind of a different way. And I for sure wasn't ready to talk about any kind of God that anybody wanted anything to do with at all. And, to be real, that didn't really work for me. And so I had to go out and do some more research. That research brought me to when I was 26 years old, and I ended up looking at 14 felonies and looking at doing, I think their first offer was 18 years in the state penitentiary. And then from there, that was enough fear to really chin check me and make me realize, wow, man, I might be an addict, I might be an alcoholic, I might actually have a problem. And, I had one chance, and like I said, that fear kept me sober for a few years. It kept me clean for a few years. And, but I'll tell you this, fear can be a great motivator, but as soon as that fear isn't there anymore and the rubber actually hits the road in reality, I literally went out 48 hours after I was off felony probation. And that was after almost 5 years sober. And I had worked the steps. I had worked with guys. I had spoken probably 50, 60 times in that time period. A lot of good things happened to me in that time period. I mean, I met my wife during that period. I mean, a lot of great stuff started happening in my life. And there's an old adage here, which is don't allow the life that the program has given you to take you out of the program. And I used to prescribe to that for a long time, but the fact is that I took me out of the program. Every decision that I ever made in my life, I made. And that's what brought me to where I'm at. And that is what it is, But the reason I bring up that time period is because that's when I really got introduced to this thing. That's when I really started understanding what this thing was all about. And that was especially when I started working with other young men in the program. And at that point, this thing of ours took on a whole different life for me. I can't even really explain it, man. I had a guy explain it to me one time. Like, he asked me if I understood how water works. And I looked at him and I said, well, yeah, you drink water and that's how it works, right? And what he meant was, he goes, no, scientifically, do you understand how water works? And I said, no, man, you must be smarter than I am, because I absolutely do not get how water works. And he goes, okay, Christopher, well, water is 3 molecules. It's hydrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. And, when two drunks that are really trying to help each other and live a better life get together, there's something that happens there. There's a magic that happens there. And I'm a really big Emmett Fox fan. Emmett Fox is one of the guys that deeply inspired Bill Wilson before he wrote the Big Book. And Emmett Fox has this really famous quote that's, a little spark can cause a great fire. And, that third molecule, in my humble opinion and in my experience, is what I like to call God, and what I like to call a God of my understanding. Because there's something that happens there when one guy helps another, or when another woman in the program helps another woman in the program, that is completely beyond my explanation. And frankly, I don't really need to understand or how that actually takes place. But I can tell you this much: I don't know what it looks like, or a face or anything like that. And frankly, my perception of it isn't really even that important. But I know what it feels like, and I know that it feels really good, and I know that it feels a lot better than anything that I was experiencing in my other way of life. And that's just been my experience. When I first started speaking, I was told that, what we always do is what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. That was just like the adage that I was taken through when I first started doing this. And, but tonight, I mostly just wanted to talk about the steps, and I wanted to talk about how they've changed both my life and others around me. And I'm just going to touch on a few different things, and that's going to be all I got. The first step, we were admitting we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. That's the kickoff. That's the first one. Admitting that we have essentially lost control, and that's it. And my sponsor up north, Steve Azevedo, used to literally go up to every new guy he met and just ask him one simple question: are you done? Is it bad enough yet? And if they couldn't answer that question, that was the end of that conversation. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, especially when you're first coming around, that's a hard question to ask or to answer, because a lot of us don't know. But if they said yes to that, he asked them 2 more questions. He said, well, do you believe in any kind of God or a power greater than you? And if they said yes, he said, well, are you all willing to believe that you could depend on that power rather than yourself? And that was the whole conversation, and that's where we started. And that was the simplest way I've ever heard somebody explaining the first 3 steps. I heard one guy say one time, 1 through 3, we give it up. 4 through 9, we clean it up. 10 through 12, we keep it up. And I really, really liked that a lot. That was a very basic way for explaining to a simple drunk like me to understand the steps of this program. Because I'm a rationalizer, man. I tell myself rational lies about everything, about all kinds of different things in my life. And I will talk myself in and out of situations that frankly could and should and would have killed me. And the fact that I'm even sitting here, at almost 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, sober, speaking to a room of people that are also trying to change their lives is a small miracle in itself to me. Because, if you would have asked me 15 years ago if I was going to be doing this, I would have told you were out of your tree. There's no way that was going to happen. I think that you can break down step 1 in 2 sentences, which is, are you ready to live or are you ready to die? And that's the decision we have to make. Because for me, when I was using drugs and when I was drinking, I was dying slowly, not quickly, over a long period of time. One of the things it says in here that I really like is every alcoholic is faced with a decision. We could either live life on a spiritual basis or die an alcoholic death. Only an alcoholic like me and many other people I've met, or an addict, would have to even think about that question. Like, if you were sitting at Vaughn's right now and you asked 30 people that question, they're just normal, everyday people, I guarantee you that almost every one of them would say live life on a spiritual basis. But for us, it's not that easy, right? And that's why we have guys that went before us in this thing that guide us through this, because it's not always that easy to figure out on our own. And frankly, we don't do it on our own. I'm also a really big fan of Chuck C. One of my favorite lines from Chuck C. is that, surrender is the only war that we win by giving up. And that, once again, summarizes step 1. If we're willing to let go and willing to let God in step 2, then we'll be okay. And maybe we'll get there. Maybe we won't. But, in my experience, if we work this thing, it tells me at the bottom that we'll have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, and we can carry this message to other alcoholics. And for me, that is literally the biggest and best thing that I can do for anyone else. And it's literally one of the only things I've ever experienced in my life that is truly selfish and selfless at the same time. And there's very, very, very few things like that in this world. I really like this line on page 68, and I'm going to segue into step 2 and 3 now, where it talks about depending on our Creator. And if you've heard me speak at a meeting recently, I may have said this, so I apologize. But, for me, depending on our Creator means no fear. It means that either God was everything or God is nothing. What was our choice to be? And that's not to say that if you don't believe in God, or if you are an agnostic or anything like that, then you can't get sober and you can't stay sober, because you can. You absolutely can, especially by working the steps and especially by sticking in the middle of this thing. But for me, and this is just for me, that didn't work. Because I tried to run things Christopher's way for a really long time and do things how I wanted to do them, with absolutely nothing out there and no belief in anything but myself. And for me, that didn't work. And it might work for other people, and I've seen it work for other people. But I'll tell you this, man. A life ran on self-will is no life that I want to live anymore. It's just not, and for whatever that looks like. I heard this other thing when we were talking about God the other day that I really liked, because I was at a meeting the other day when about 20 different alcoholics were talking about God. And they were talking about, one guy was an atheist, one guy was a Buddhist, another guy said, I don't even know what that is. Another guy was a Christian. There was like all these different takes on what the higher power was. And a good friend of mine told me a story the other day about a blind man and an elephant. And it's like an old proverb, and if you're familiar with this, that's okay, and maybe you're not. But so there's these 4 or 5 blind guys, and they all have their hands on an elephant in different places. And the one guy says, oh, the elephant, he has like a big long nose. It's like a snake, and that's what elephant's like. Another guy has his hand like on the leg, and he goes, no, the elephant's, it's like a tree. It's like big and thick. And another guy says, no, it's like he's got his hand on the elephant's ear, and he goes, oh, no, it's like big and floppy like a wing. where I'm going with this is that they're all right. Every one of them's right, you know? I mean, and that's what, in my humble opinion, that's what we mean by a God of our understanding. You know, we understand the God that we can touch, that we can feel, you know? And like I said, whatever that is for you, it really doesn't matter. If it's Jesus Christ, if it's Buddha, if it's whatever it is, I would just highly encourage you to have something greater than you that you can believe in. You know, that's all that means. I mean, whether that be nature or the ocean or anything like that, you know, I would really encourage that because that really worked for me. You know, in step 4, we make, you know, a searching, fearless moral inventory of ourselves. The first 100 times I said that and the first 3 times I did it, I had literally no idea what that meant. And I really thought that I did. Like, I really thought that I did. And I thought that I came out with all my stuff. I remember the first one of these I did was at that first sponsor's house that I was talking about when I was 23. And I told them all these things, and, you know, I probably left out about 25% of my life. And I really thought that that was going to be sufficient, and that was going to be enough to keep me sober. And the reality was that it was sufficient for a very short time period. But as I grew older and as I continued on, you know, we're only as sick as our secrets, man. And those little things continued to whoop my butt up and down the street. And there was a lot of little things about my life that I was not ever willing to tell anyone, ever. And this last time through the steps, I got to work them with a man who I greatly respect and love. And I was able to tell him everything. And I'm talking everything about my life, things that I was never going to talk to anybody about. And I experienced this thing that day that I just can't help but sharing with people. And a lot of people are going to be like, dude, you are crazy. And they'd be like, well, you know what? It really happened. You can ask the guy after the meeting. We were sitting in his backyard, and it had been really cloudy that whole day, like really, really cloudy. And it was a Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon. And I go through this like 7-hour inventory with my sponsor, and we're going through it. I mean, we had to take breaks. There was like a pile of cigarette butts in the ashtray by the end of it. I mean, we were really getting into this thing. And, you know, during that inventory, man, we laughed, we cussed, I cried like a little kid multiple times. It was one of the most freeing experiences in my life, man. And at the very end of it, there's 2 things I want to share about it. One thing, a lot of these things that I thought were so major, that were like so life-changing, that I was going to my effing grave with, that I was never going to talk to anybody about, when we brought them from the darkness into the light of God, it disintegrated, and literally he was sitting there looking at me with like, you know, like, I don't know, like cartoon eyes, like blinking his eyes going like, dude, that was all? That was your big major thing you've been carrying around for all these years? And I was like, well, yeah, isn't that was a really big deal. And what dawned on me is that when we bring these things from the darkness into the light, it's not a big deal. And it goes away. And the fact is that most of these things are so big to us. And we, not just ourselves, but our disease, my alcoholism, my addiction, will beat me over the head any way it knows how. And it'll try to get in the middle of me, my heart, my mind, and my spirit with any crowbar it can to try to mess with me. And the fact is that if we let that stuff go, it doesn't have any power anymore. And that's why we do this. You know, my sponsor refers to it as dropping off the bricks you've been carrying in your backpack for all these years. I really, really liked that. It made a lot of sense to me. And, you know, in my experience in this thing, it's right about there, because right after that we jump into our character defects and getting rid of those. But that's when I started noticing a real change in myself. You know, I felt different right away when I started tearing into the steps again. But right about there, as I was driving down the street from my sponsor's house, I don't know how else to explain it, man. I felt free. I felt freer than I had felt in a long time. And I know what it's like not to feel free, man. I've talked to my mom through a piece of glass for a year straight before. You know, I've lived in a cell. I've lived in multiple kinds of cells, you know. And I'm not just talking about the physical ones. I'm talking about these too. You know, I mean, alcoholics have a tendency, and addicts have a tendency to believe that we're special and believe that no one else in the world has been through what we've been through. And that's why that step is so important, because when I was sharing with that man in his backyard, he let me realize that I'm not really that different, man. And that most of us aren't. Like, most of us are pretty darn similar. And most of us are incredible, artistic, creative, wonderful, sensitive, maybe touchy, people. And we carry around a lot of stuff that's not on us, man. It's really not. And so, that was my experience with that. In 6 and 7, humbly asking God to remove these defects of character and asking to remove our shortcomings. To me, that part of this thing, it doesn't matter. And just to keep it honest, a lot of this I'm using is recycled material. It's stuff that I heard from somebody say at some point, and I was like, man, I like that. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm going to use that, and hopefully somebody else recycles it from me sometime. And hopefully their sponsees recycle it. Because, man, I'll tell you what, some of these things really changed my life when I heard them. It doesn't matter if you are an addict or an alcoholic or anything like that. That's one of the reasons I love this meeting so much, because it's not about that. Addiction, alcoholism, it's not about that. It's a human thing. It's all about just us being human and us being able to look at these different little parts of ourselves that we just don't want anymore. Like being in fear, being resentful, being angry, being egotistical, and being based on self. And those were the major ones for me, and that's just for me. I don't know what anybody else's would be, but I'll tell you this much. When I really, from the bottom of my heart, asked my Creator to remove that stuff from my life, a lot of things I just stopped thinking about, man. I just did. I'm very blessed in this program is that I have 3 sponsors. I have a Southern California sponsor, a Northern California sponsor, and a Grand sponsor. And I think that's just fine. Have all the sponsors you want. But I'll say this, man. My sponsor up north taught me this trick that I just freaking love, and I said this the other day, but I just love it, so I want to repeat it. And he said, Christopher, after we worked 6 and 7, and we're heading towards 8 and 9, because if you have anything just pop up in your head that's egotistical, one of the things I heard somebody say when I first came in is I knew everybody in the room was talking about me and listening to everything I said, because I am so egotistical and so based on self that I just totally got that. I was like, my God, that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, what he taught me was to take my little spiritual Sharpie in my head and just cross it out and write irrelevant over the top. And I wonder what that guy's thinking about. Well, that's irrelevant. Just cross that out. I wonder how this is going to go or how that's going to go. Basically anything that's not based on what I can do for others or what I can put into the stream of life that is positive is essentially irrelevant to my life and to my walk and to my existence on this planet. One of the things that it says in here also is our real purpose. Our real purpose, according to the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, is to be of maximum service to others. It says we fit ourselves to be of maximum service to others and to God and to people around us. For a drunk like me, that was a pretty huge jump from step 1. Because, when I came back, I remember literally sitting on that curve out there and feeling sick as anything and having a good friend of mine walk up to me. And once again, just like we talked about in 4 and 5, he let me know that I wasn't alone, man. He let me know that he had felt that exact same way. And it wasn't that long ago. And I could see this spark in this guy's eye that I missed it, man, because I had it before. And it made me just feel really good. Step 8 and 9, making a list of all the people we had harmed and be willing to make amends to them all. This time through was the 4th, 8th step I had done. And my first ones were almost all finite. And what I mean by that was they were all based in finance and things like that. It was oh, I owe this person $500. Oh, this time I wrecked a car. Stuff like that. That's because that's where I was at the first time I went through these things. That was the stuff that really made sense to me. This time through, I really dug into it a lot more, and I went back and talked to a lot of my friends from Northern California that stuck with me for years of recovery, and that I was so selfish that after those years, I packed my duffel bags and hit the road, man, because that was just not for me anymore. Those are a lot of the guys I talked to, and where I'm going with this is that, you will get out of this however much you put into it, man. If you put in a little, you're going to get a little back. If you put in a lot, you're going to get a lot back. But in sticking with, not just that, but our primary purpose, which is to, pass this thing along to new people, for me anyway, I wanted to try to get this thing like I never had before. And one of the things that Chuck C says in his book that I really like is the key to that for the record, I completely freaking missed in my 20s, is being truly, rigorously honest from the very start about my path and about my life and about things that I had been through and about what I wanted later. Because like I said, in my 20s, when I got sober, I wanted to get clean, and I definitely didn't want to go to prison, but I didn't want to live any differently either. And at the time I thought that I did, but in reality I didn't. And as I grew older and grew, I don't want to say a little wiser, but definitely more experienced, I just didn't want it anymore, man. I don't really know how else to say it. And I said that to my mom the other day on the phone, and she came unglued, man. And she told me that, and I asked her, and I said, and I mean unglued in a good way. She started crying her eyes out, and I said, Mom, like, what did I say? Like, are you okay? Like, God, and what she said is that she felt like she had her son back, and that, man, that really hit home with me in a real serious way, man, because that's what we get here, man. I like this last weekend, I got to watch a brother of mine just sit there and play catch with his kids, man. And that sounds like a really small thing, but that's not a small thing. That's a huge thing. And I guarantee you that if we weren't doing this thing right here, that would not have been happening. I don't even want to think about what we would have been doing if we weren't doing this here and hanging out there. But anyway, I'm going to try to wrap this up and not get too long-winded here. Steps 10 and 11, continuing to take personal inventory, and where we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I've heard this a lot of different ways in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've heard people that just do the steps one time, and then they use the 10th step every day, and that's how they do it. And at the end of every day, they look at the 10th step, and they essentially are doing a mini 4th step to stop themselves from having to do more 9th steps, basically. Which, if that's a stopgap and that works for you, then that's awesome. Up north, where I grew up, we do the steps every year. It's not a one-time thing. It's like spring cleaning. When you're done with them, next spring you start again. And then you give it away, and you keep going. Because, mine and a lot of my friends' experiences, life is not going to stop happening just because you get sober. Other things may still happen. And that's okay, because that's really the root of, I would say, of alcoholism. Like when I first got here, I used to think this thing was all about drinking. It was all about using, and because that's what you hear when you first get here. We had a problem with drinking. They give out chips for like not drinking and not using, so that's what I thought it was about. But the fact is that it's not really about that. It's about who we are, how we are, growing in the likeness of our Creator, and how we interact with the outside world. And that's what we learn here, is that it really, my cousin, who's been hanging out for about 8-9 years now, somewhere in there, he calls, giving up drinking step 1A. He's like, that's just the beginning of this thing. And for some people, that's enough, man. And that's totally fine. Like, if you just want to be sober and not drink anymore, God bless you. If you're sober and you're living a different life and you're happy with it, that's awesome. But, to be fit of maximum service to God and to others, in my experience, that means going through all 12 of these things. And there's 12 of them for a reason, and they're in line for a reason. They made it very, very simple for us. And it worked in the 30s, and it works now, man. It just does. And that's not just my experience. I've seen that a lot. I'm just going to say a couple more things, and I'm going to wrap this up. When I first met, I have to talk about this guy because I've been very blessed in this thing to meet and be around some men that really, really affected my life, man. Like, really affected my life in a real and positive way. And I feel not just indebted to them, but indebted to this program for that. Because if it wasn't for this program, that would have never happened. I would have never met these guys. My life never would have changed like this. And, one of the gentlemen that actually, he's not here tonight, but when I first saw him speak, I was very new, both in recovery and in my sobriety. And I saw this guy talking at the front of a room, and he was talking about when he first came into the rooms, and he was physically bankrupt, spiritually bankrupt, mentally bankrupt. And he described the home that he was living in before he got sober. And this guy was a general contractor. He had built like amazing homes, like these really high-end homes in Sonoma County. And he was living in a chicken wire shack with drywall on the sides. And he referred to it as his swinging bachelor pad. Awesome. And there was some drugs in his story too. Go figure. Anyway, when he was speaking, not only did he have this. The only way I can describe it is humility, man. I mean, he had this like humble way about him, and that's that characteristic that's always attracted me to other men in the program that I really care about. When I heard them speak and when I heard them talk, it like settled something in me, and it charged me up at the same time in a way that I couldn't quite understand. And just like my understanding of God, man, I can't tell you what God looks like, but I know what he feels like. And I feel him when I hear people say those things. I really do. And you might think I'm crazy, and that's cool if you think that, but I know what it feels like, But anyway, when I saw, his name was Tom Ladari, and he introduces himself like that at every meeting he goes to, so I don't think that's a big deal that I do. But he referred to himself as being the richest man in the world, being the man with the best friends a guy could ask for, and being married to the most beautiful woman on the planet. And like, when I heard him say that, it like blew the back of my head off. Like, I was just like, I want what that guy has. Whatever it is that is, I want that. And at the time, like, I was so young in my walk that I kind of thought he was actually talking about this kind of riches. And the fact is that he was in no way talking about that kind of riches. In terms of physical things, I mean, like whatever, outside looking in, wasn't that big of a deal. But this guy was rich in a way that I frankly couldn't understand at the time, but I believe now, I'm not going to say I understand it, but I'm going to say that I'm scratching the surface of understanding it. And I'm starting to get what that's all about, One of the things I've experienced previously in working with newcomers, and right now I'm like right at step 12. We're like going through step 11 next week. We're like going right there, and I can't wait till I can start sponsoring guys again, man. That was one of the brightest parts of my life, and the best experiences I ever had was getting to give this thing away. And I'm really looking forward to it again. And for me, an indicator has always been, if I'm working a good program, new guys will come up and talk to me. New guys will come up and start talking to me about the program and about recovery and things like that. And it is a pleasure to talk to them, man. I mean, I told the guy the other week, he goes, man, thank you so much. And I said, dude, you're helping me way more than I'm helping you. And he kind of gave me this like kind of befuddled look, and he was like, huh? And I was like, don't worry about it. You'll stick around. You'll completely understand what I'm talking about. And because that's what we get here, man. Like I said, it's this feeling of selflessness and being selfish at the same time. Like in reality, this is really helping me, but I'm helping you, and it's really like that. I'm going to say like 2 more things, and then I'm going to wrap it up because I don't want to go over, and I want to give everybody a chance to share as well. Sorry. It's so funny because whenever I do these things, like I mark like all these things. I'm like, I'm going to say this stuff, and it's going to be so inspiring. I freaking didn't even crack this book the whole time I was standing over. But, funny how that works, huh? It's good to laugh at ourselves. Well, yeah, I'm going to find it, I swear. Give me 1 second here. So, in my favorite chapter in the big book has always been a vision for you. Always. Because that's where they talk about what happens to our lives, man. And, when I first started coming around, my sponsor said that, Christopher, a fellowship will grow up around you, and that's something you're not going to want to miss. And I didn't even know that was out of the big book. I was like, that sounds great, Steve. Cool. That sounds like something I don't want to miss. And, when I was making one of my 9 step amends last week, a gentleman that I had spent a lot of time with said, Christopher, you don't even really owe me an amends, but he said, I think you're going to realize this, and some of you know that I'm moving home in a couple weeks. He said, you have hundreds of people here, man, that miss and love you so much, and they've been so worried, and like they can't wait to see you, man. And my experience with things like that is we're always so pent up about it, and then we walk through it, and like I said before, we bring it from the darkness to the light. It just goes away. But anyway, I'm just going to read 2 little things, and then I'm going to be done with this. One thing's about the 12th step, and that's Dr. Bob's take on the 12th step. This is not mine. This is straight out of Dr. Bob's Nightmare. It's on page 181 in the big book. Somebody asked Dr. Bob, why he sponsors people, and this nails it in a way that I can't explain it or say it, so I'm just going to use his words. Number 1, a sense of duty. Number 2, it's a pleasure to do. Number 3, because in doing so, sorry, I'm kind of an emotional guy. Some of you guys know that. Sorry about that. 3, because in doing so, I'm paying the debt to the man who took the time to pass it on to me. And, last but not least, 4, because every time I do this, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. You don't really hear too much about 12-step calls anymore, but up north we still do those a lot. And my little family up there still does them all the time. In fact, we're hooked up with a hotline up north. So when we get wet ones, they call my sponsor and some of his buddies, and I got to roll in a couple of those. And I can tell you this much, man. Doing that kind of work will ensure your sobriety like nothing else. I guarantee you that. And I mean, I'm not going to say I guarantee many things, but that is one thing I guarantee. We used to literally have an inside joke up there that you're not truly a member of this thing until you get your shoes puked on. That's when you really become, that's when you really become a member of this thing here. But I can remember like so vividly walking out of this place called the Orinda Center up there, which is in Sonoma, and they actually shut it down, which is a bummer. But I had a sponsee that had gone out, and he was using a whole array of different things, and he was in the detox tank, and he had gotten in a fight with the cops, and this dude literally had a couple teeth knocked out. He was like bleeding from the side of his mouth. This guy smelled like a freaking brewery from like outside of the door. And I walked out of that room. There wasn't a force on this planet Earth that could have made me drink after walking out of that room. I was like, that is not what I want, for sure. It was the opposite of how I felt when I saw Tom speak that night. I was like, wow, man, wow. Because it says in here that nothing will ensure my sobriety like intensive work with other alcoholics. And that's why I'm doing this right now, man. I mean, it's because this gives me a chance to pass this thing along, even a little bit. And like I said, hope that I can plant this like little mustard seed to somebody where they go, wow, man, that's really cool. That makes sense. Or maybe not. And that's all good, But I'll tell you this much, man. Right now it's 7-something o'clock at night. I'm looking pretty good on today, And something I heard somebody say the other day who was taking a 17-year chip is that it's not about time in here. It's just not. That we're all tied. Whether you have 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years, we all have today. It's one of the things I really like about NA, how they have the just for today on the back of everything. I think that it's such a powerful message. And like I shared with some of the other young people the other day, when you're 16 years old and somebody who has 20 years starts talking to you about being sober, I know that when I was 16 years old, that flew about 10 miles over my head. I was like, okay, like I haven't even been alive for 20 years. Like you're talking about, okay, like that doesn't make any sense to me. But when they started talking to me, at that time and now about taking this thing one day at a time and just being like, it's just for today. It's just one day. It's not that hard. I talked to one of the young men from the house about that the other day because he was like, well, I'm not going to be able to do this, blah, blah. I was like, well, can you do it for today? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, call me tomorrow. It's pretty simple. It's a very simple program for very complicated people. You know what I mean? Like I said, we're all complicated here, man. Nobody's special. Anyway, this is what I'm going to end with. I get emotional when I'm talking about this stuff because this literally saved my life, man. I mean, I literally mean that, and I know that I've heard people say that from the podium before, and people would say like, like whatever, or whatever they would think. It really doesn't matter. That's irrelevant, as I've said, But, like, I just feel like a blessed man today, man. That's all I can say, But anyway, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come, but only if your own house is in order. But obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us, capitalized. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to him and your fellows, and clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless and keep you until then. That's all I have.
All right, Jason, let's thank Chris again. We're going to pause for announcements and the seventh tradition, which states that the foolish